quickly look at what is the exams content and the prep, and you would look at the, the concept of thinking like a manager. What are the preparation resources that you're already uh, you know referring to? If at all you have not, if at all you are not shared with the additional content, which was, I believe, Saksham shared it almost across all the groups in the last few days, right? A few more question and answer session, question and answers copies, a couple of videos, right? So that is something that I would definitely would refer to. 17%, 20%, 33%, and 30% respective weightage, with governance being the least, risk management next least at 20%. So you're all aware of it. However, the one thing that I keep, without missing, I ensure that I inform all of my trainees is that make sure that you're giving 100% weightage to pretty much every single domain, right? So there should not be, I mean, you don't think that, one of these domains is less in terms of importance and another one is more. Because if you're talking about decision making, if you're looking at it from a senior management perspective and you're asking the senior management to go ahead and take a decision, it rather be an informed and risk-based decision than a decision based on gut feel, right? That's the thought process that I would want everybody to inculcate, even when they are reading to the question. Okay, so that's the reason why I would always recommend make sure that you give equal weightage, or rather 100% weightage to each of these. That way you would not miss or you would not underestimate any single domain. Pretty much everything is equally important. Maybe the number of questions that you get may be less, but then the knowledge would definitely is, it will be very, very crucial, right? And in terms of the exam itself, I'm sure everybody is aware of this part as well. 150 questions, all multiple choice. If, though as part of the practice, you may see a couple of questions where there could be match the following, etc. But at least in the last 3 years or so, I've not seen or heard about anyone who said we got any other type of question other than multiple choice. So one question, four answers, pick one of the answer which is the correct answer, and you have got only 4 hours. You have both remote as well as online proctored, as well as in institute or in the center proctored exams, uh, depending on whatever is your convenience. I would definitely recommend that please make sure that you are practicing in a way where uh, every hour at least you take a minute, at least almost a 5 to 10 minute break, so that you spread throughout the, I would say, 3 or 4 hours also. Make sure you completely utilize that time. That's the most important element. So let's say if you're practicing in a way wherein it's like in an hour, or every minute uh, you're able to complete one question. So after 50 minutes, take maybe a 5 or 10 minute break. You generally get two breaks, and yeah, you can. I would strongly recommend get into that. That way, you will not get any kind of a question fatigue. And when you are too engrossed, sometimes you may start overthinking. Analysis paralysis strikes in, and then you may start getting answers incorrectly. You may start thinking about the questions that you already answered. Oh, okay, what did I answer that? So that it's the nature of the mind. At least for me, it did that when I was prepping for it. So to avoid all these things is where we recommend that you take a break every 50 odd questions. That way, I mean, generally it's enough time. I've had, while I'm myself, I'm telling that try to take as many breaks as possible, or all the breaks allowed. I do have people a part of my sessions who completed the exam in about hour and a half or 2 hours, right? And they walked out saying that yeah, we cleared. So uh, while all these advice is on one side, when it comes to these small little things, yeah, every person for themselves, right? So obviously suit your style, but if that's not the case, if whatever pattern and whatever best practice that we shared, if it suits you, then definitely follow that. And in terms of certification, uh, you pass the exam and then you apply for certification. You need minimum 5 years of uh, experience. I'm sure everybody here is aware that there are a few waivers uh, given any other certification. Like for example, if you do not have 5 years of experience, or if you cannot show 5 years of experience in the field of information security, then you've got a few waivers. Okay, that information I can share in the chat. Please remind me a little later. And then the criteria for clearing the exam. Uh, it's a scaled score, 200 to 800. Now no one knows how exactly the scoring happens, right? The overall passing score is 450, and it is 450 for each of the domains as well. That's the reason I was saying that please give equal importance to all the domains. Okay, maybe the number of questions that you get may be less, but it's very important because you have to score 450 in each of the domains, and also score 450 overall, right? Uh, and I'm not trying to say this to, or I'm not saying this to scare you folks or not to discourage you. I've had people who have completed, I mean, scored like 550, 600 plus overall, but then in one or two domains they did not score 450, and because of that they did not clear, right? So do not leave any domain. Okay. As far as the exam prep is concerned, right? Please make sure, number one, how many of you here, as part of your prep, started going through the glossary of the manual at the end of the manual, or the glossary file itself, which is a separate file. That was a question for you folks, by the way, just to be more clear. How many of you started just going through just the glossary, right? Thumbs up is fine. No one? Just one person. Okay, Rahul, Nilesh. Okay. So doesn't look like many. My humble request is to make sure that go ahead and start going through each of those terms. Understand the term. Because when it comes to information security, understanding each term is very, very important, right? You cannot substitute one term with another. It's not recommended, right? So make sure you understand those terms. And this particular exam, it's a test of your judgment for that particular question. Pick every question for itself. There is no linking question, team. Please remember that. There are no linking questions. As in, there is no question where they will say in the previous question, we gave you the scenario, take the same scenario and apply it in different way now. No, there will not be anything like that. So pick every question independently as a separate one, right? And make sure that you are able to synthesize, process whatever that is being said in the question. And the only way that this is possible is by practicing as many questions as possible. After you equip yourself with your understanding of terms, you have the knowledge. And when I say knowledge, what I mean is I'm not talking about your experience. I'm talking about knowledge of the ISACA based CISM manual, right? Now, that knowledge could be the trainings that you attended, or the knowledge could be uh, the fact that you read through the entire manual, right? Whatever that knowledge is, but you should be having this knowledge first. You should have made up your mind to leave whatever experience that you have for the duration of, for the duration when you are answering those questions outside. You don't get those questions in, because what happens is when you start bringing in your real world experience. Now every enterprise works differently. Every enterprise, they consider, generally use terms in a specific enterprise, right? It's different. Okay. If you use the same term in the context of CISM, it may be absolutely wrong, right? So it is very important that you ensure that you read through the CISM manual at least once. At least read through it. Okay. If you have already attended any of these trainings, make sure that you have that particular knowledge. So the when you start reading through the question, it should not look alien to you. And that's the most important element that I would, I would emphasize on, right? And there will be questions where you would feel that all the answers are wrong. Fair point. All the answers may appear wrong, but you have to pick from those worst lot. So whatever is the best from the worst, you have to pick that. Unfortunately, if you skip a question, then it would be, when I say skipping, I'm talking about, moving on without answering it. Every question which is not answered will be considered as incorrect. So make sure that you answer all the questions, and when you're practicing, make sure you follow these, right? So as I said, there are no right answers, just the best answers. And don't get into too much of analysis for every question. Please don't do what if analysis. I'm sure some of you understand this. People who have at least attended my session, I keep emphasizing on this. So there is a question, you give the answer, and then you know whether it is the right or wrong. And then you suddenly, if you get it wrong, then suddenly you get into a what if analysis. What if it could have been this? When trying to map the answer that you selected to that question by changing the parameters in that question. If the question would have been like this, the answer would have been like that. No, please don't do that. Please do not do that. If there is a requirement for you to actually triage, right, in a question, like for example, if somebody is talking about an activity, and we will have a few questions like that. If there is an activity based questions, yes, that you can definitely triage. But then don't start questioning the question itself. Like, what if this, what if that? No, please don't do that, right? And there would be a few questions where there would be more than one correct answer, or there would be, I mean, all the answers, all the options which are given to you are all correct answers. There are questions that you may face like that as well. In such a scenario, please pick the answer which basically encompasses everything, right? We would think we have a few questions like that as well, as part of this set that we are going to go through. So make sure that you always choose the one which basically includes. When we say all encompassing or most encompassing, it means the one which includes pretty much everything. And then, as I said, terms. The emphasis on the terms which are there. Uh, so if there is a word which is called criticality, they are hinting at importance. If they are talking about sensitivity, then we're talking about how confidential that information is. If we're talking about impact, when we speak about impact, it means consequence, right? If there is an impact of, impact on legal. if there is a regulatory impact, or if there is a compliance impact. What it means is what are the consequences that you as an enterprise are going to face. Okay, and there are few formulae that I would want you all to memorize. Unfortunately, that is one thing that we cannot ignore, right? While the others, I would say, please do not sit and start memorizing things. Yes, if it helps you create mind maps for for each of the domains, but I would never recommend memorizing things unless it's a formula, right? There would be there can be questions where we're talking about the risk in itself, the formula for risk, right? Probability or likelihood multiplied by impact. And when you talk about likelihood and impact, it will then take multiple shapes. So it could be threat multiplied by vulnerability also. It could be probability and consequence also. So there are substitutes which would be used in the exam just to confuse you. Okay. And there could be anyone here who can give me the formula for calculating the ALE. Okay. Make sure that you have these things. Anyone here the value of a safeguard? Remembers the value of a safeguard or a value of a control? Fair point. I'll share that information also. We'll include that as part of uh, all the Telegram groups. I'll on the section where um, the value of a safeguard, um, both formula and the idea, followed by a set of questions, so that you practice a few questions with that concept, and then maybe it will register better. Okay. Uh, in terms of a safeguard versus countermeasure, right? What is a safeguard and what is a countermeasure? Anyone here can explain what's a safeguard and what's a countermeasure? No? Okay. So what is a safeguard, Anthony? And what's a countermeasure? And both of not which part of it is that you don't agree with? Okay. Uh, so I'll park that point and we will revisit it. Now, moving on, right, to the guidelines. Please don't make any assumptions. No analysis paralysis. Don't do that as part of. And as we are going through these guidelines, there are so many things that you're telling. Okay, how is it that we will remember all of this when we are giving the exam? You don't have to remember all these things in the exam, right? Please make sure that you remember all these things when you're practicing. When you're doing your Q&As, make sure that you're practicing these. You are practicing that thought process. And obviously the same thing kicks in when you're basically making sure that you are, getting your mind, training your brain to get used to that particular thought process. Okay. Uh, I'm sure everybody here, whoever started practicing questions, would have come across questions having these terms, right? What is the most important thing? What's the first thing? What's the best thing? What's the primary activity? What's the main part? What's the greatest benefit? What's the least? What's the lowest? Everybody understands this, right? So make sure that you're focusing, you're paying more attention on, these terms, right? Uh, the moment there is and specific emphasis on that particular term, then the two things that the question is telling you. Okay, number one, there could be more than one correct answer. So you'll have to choose the right answer basis whatever term that is highlighted, right? Second thing is if they are talking about primary, if they're talking about first, they are hinting at a sequential method, right? Like for example, what's the first step of risk assessment? So when we're looking at uh, any kind of activity, right? And especially when you talk about, you know, few of the folks are part of my existing batch, current running batch, so we haven't covered domain 4 yet. But then if you want to look at it more from a incident response perspective, right? Uh, what's the first step when you talk about incident response? Okay, or when you actually talk about containment, what happens in containment? What happens in eradication phase? Okay, it's which is the reason why I was telling that it is very important for you folks to understand the terms, and wherever you're talking about a process, understanding the nitty-gritties of that particular process, right? The flow of that particular process. These things, it's extremely important that you know. Make sure when you are reading, you pay extra focus on these elements. Uh, Once you complete the training, and then once you would have just read through the entire manual, I think you have a fair idea of what is what, right? And the next point is to pay special attention to these elements so that you don't miss on any of these, right? Now, if you talk about a scenario where the question would present a scenario, and they would basically ask you what is the risk treatment which is opted for here, right? What kind of a treatment is opted for here, and what are the different types of treatment? It should immediately flash in your mind, right? Risk mitigation, risk acceptance, risk rejection, or risk avoidance, and risk transfer, right? So this is how you have to slowly start training your mind. And at the moment you see a term, automatically the activity behind it should start running in your mind, right? And it's basically a thought process which basically is focused on roles and responsibilities at the end of the day, right? And then the skill. And where is it that we speak about it? It's part of domain 1 that we speak about it, and as part of domain 3 we speak about it. So that's how it's all interlinked. Okay. uh, my am I being clear, or is it going over your head? In terms of analysis, right? uh, there are a few points that I wanted to highlight. Number one is, as I said, continuing from the previous part, is the sequence of events, right? What happens first and what happens next, right? Like, for example, if you have to conduct a forensic analysis, okay, and I'm talking about domain 4 here. So if you want to conduct a forensic analysis, what should happen first? So would you perform the forensic analysis on the evidence which is collected directly, or would you actually take a copy of that? A copy of that, absolutely. And then when you are making a copy, when you after you have taken rather the bit by bit copy, and when you have taken copying from the original, right? Then hash to verify the integrity. Perfect. Yes. Right. So you're ensuring that you are using the right protect diode. Perfect. Right. So the moment you speak about forensic analysis, right, this is the part that I was trying to emphasize on, right? Whatever happens before, during, and after, everything should basically flash in your mind, right? Let's say you talk about containment, right? The same thing. Whatever happened before, during, and after containment. Once you get a clear picture of that, once you have equipped with that knowledge, is where you would be able to get the right answer. And the second thing is the tense of that particular question, right? There would be questions where the question would be focusing on, right, the activity, a specific activity. Like, for example, when you are developing a policy, what is it that you are going to focus on, right? The question is basically, the answers could be, maybe there are more than two or three correct answers there. But the question is asking you what is it that you would do while you are developing the policy. So that's the important element. So what is it that you're doing there? You're writing, but basically you've still not done that yet. If you are conducting, for example, a forensic analysis, or if you are designing a control, right? The control design is still happening. Because the control design is happening, right? It doesn't exist. So when you are reading through the question, the answers basically should be accordingly selected, chosen, right? And then the scope of each of the activity. What do you do as part of each of the activity? Scope of that particular activity. When you are, for example, doing risk identification, what's the scope? What all happens as part of risk identification? How do you identify a risk? Right? When you're talking about risk mitigation, how is it that you are going to mitigate the risk? Is applying a control enough? Right? Or when you're doing risk analysis, how do you come about or how do you derive the impact? How can you know likelihood? Okay. And then what's the input? What's the output? Like, for example, I just gave you the answer, right? Like, as part of risk analysis. So how do you calculate single loss expectancy? And is ALE always the best method? But then that's a different question. But then doing what results in what? Okay. Always make sure that uh, when you talk about information security, not sure how many of you folks go by these principles of effective outcomes of governance, or the outcomes of effective governance. If you're doing effective governance, there are 6 essential outcomes that you have. Okay, making sure that there is a strategic alignment, making sure that uh, risk management, making sure that you have you have value delivery, uh, making sure that you are doing resource optimization, performance measurement, and assurance process integration. Very good. Yes. Right. So as part of all these things, right, one of the most important element uh, from an information security management perspective, when you look at strategic alignment, risk management, uh, value delivery, resource optimization, and performance measurement, all of these are things which are done by management, right? But there is the assurance process integration, which is not 100% in the hands of the information security management, right? So it's very so who all are there as part of this? So your internal reviews that you conduct, your self-assessment basically are conducted, and then you're talking about external audits, internal and external audits. The folks who are not part of your team, right? Not part of the information security manager's team. Okay, so effectively, when you actually are doing this activity, the point that you are emphasizing to yourself is that just because there is a policy doesn't mean that it's followed, right? And when you're talking about this element, you're also emphasizing to yourself one of the most important points, which is people are the weakest link as far as information security is concerned. So why is it that writing doesn't mean something is happening, and why is it that you always have to go look and verify? It's because it's because of the people, right? Now we all know that we should not tailgate, right? Now tell me honestly, in the last 3 months, how many of, because we are in a rush, not deliberately, not that we want to break a rule, right? I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not asking you to raise your hands. It's fine, it's okay. But the point is that, okay, so it is always mandatory for you to go look and verify, measure, always monitor. And that's what is also one of the key elements of your control management, aka your information security management. Because at the end of the day, information security management's majority element or majority time goes behind in managing controls, making sure that the controls are currently working, controls are effective, right? And there is a constant output for you to effectively monitor those controls are continuously being given to you, right? And the next point that I would like to emphasize on is risk assessment's role. There would be many questions where, I mean, as part of your practice, obviously I won't know how many questions would be there in the exam, but when you're practicing, you come across many questions which would be falling into this bucket around risk assessment. It would be like, okay, there is a new global regulation which came into picture. Okay, what's the first step that you would take as part of your enterprises? I mean, your role as an information security manager, what would you do, right? Or somebody is actually not following a rule, okay, what would you do, right? For example, whatever point which is mentioned in the, uh, just a second, please. Whatever point is mentioned here, writing does not mean it is happening. Go look and verify. So let's say that, okay, our rules are not followed. So you verified. It's an organization rule which is not followed. What would you do? Would you take a uh, disciplinary action immediately, or would you actually do a risk assessment, or at least would you have something in place, something handy to make sure that, okay, you can ascertain what risk it is for you to not follow, sorry, for somebody not following a specific rule, right? So that's what risk assessment basically is always aiming at, right? Which, and that thought process, once you start inculcating in your mind, it will ensure that you take every decision based on risk assessment. And it's not just about you are pushing people to start taking uh, the I mean, you start pushing people, as in your senior management also, to start making and taking decisions based on risk, right? And when you are approaching them, you would obviously look at that. And we're talking about risk assessment, right? So you, you're partially there, I would say, right? So it's not just about analyzing the impact; it's also the likelihood, right? When the rule is not followed, uh, that's another element that you would actually look at, right? So what I would look at, what I would basically make a few corrections there with that particular thought process is, when you look at analyzing the impact, please also analyze the likelihood. Okay, so that would basically apply to both, all three of you, right? Swati, Shafi, Anthony, right? Make sure you get used to that element. And that's why we said, first analyze the risk, assess the risk, right? So you're identifying the risk. As part of your risk analysis, you're doing, you calculating both impact and as well as likelihood. And then a few guidelines. There is a problem, initiate a plan, right? When it comes to domain one, looking at your org structure, right? And uh, so there would be questions like, for example, who among the following is always, I mean, who's best suited to sponsor your information security initiative? And the options would be CEO, COO, CRO, CIO. Who is the best, right? And I repeat, CEO, COO, CIO and CRO, right? Team. So it's CEO, right? Generally, whoever is the highest. So there can be questions where they give you these designations. What if it is COO, CIO, CRO, and CTO? Then who? And if it is CRO, CIO, CTO, and CISO, then who? Right? It basically would differ from question to question. It's always the highest, right? So what matters is that you are looking at the options and try to look for who is the highest. And then what happens is this understanding what is going on now in the chat, okay, is looking at different organizations and then look at the structure, how exactly the structure is, right? And as Shafiq said, absolutely, it could be board of directors also. You're right. However, it depends on the options that you have there. So you need to look at that. Because the next point that I wanted to mention is the third one there, right? Management is the answer only in specific cases. Management or board of directors, these this particular option, it's the answer only in specific cases. It doesn't mean that in a for the moment you find board of directors or senior management, immediately go jump up and select that as the answer. Read through the question and then only select. Okay. Same is the case with respect to uh, you know in scenarios where something like never, all, always, right? We're talking about a threat or a risk land space for an enterprise. In a scenario or like that, uh, these these topics, or sorry, these words, they don't exist, because the threat landscape and the risk landscape is always evolving. And in such a scenario, never, all, always, these kind of things, they don't exist in the dictionary, right? Because when we talk about risk, it's not just the impact, right? It's also likelihood. So can the risk be mitigated to zero at any point in time? It can never be, right? And as a result, when something like these, when points like these are there, just be a little bit more. And same thing applicable to best practices, international standards, okay, industry best practices, things like that, right? So please make sure that those things that you pay attention to. And this is one of the elements when I was talking about, when you look at your current roles in different organizations, right? This is one of the most abused word, right? Industry best practice. Generally, I'm not saying it is happening in your organization for sure, but when things, when somebody asks you, why is it that you want to do things? And people who are not better prepared to answer that question, they immediately blame it on industry best practice. Because everybody is doing it, let us also do it, right? It's like wearing a mask during COVID. Everybody knows, sorry, because everybody is doing, we are also doing it, right? Is it really effective? What does it stop? Blah blah blah. No one knows. The same thing here. Don't fall for industry best practice. You are the information security manager. You know what is the risk, so you have to take the corrective or preventive, whatever action that is required. So only you know the context, right? And unless and until it is specifically mentioned, right? What is your role for every single question? Unless and until it's specifically mentioned otherwise, what is the role that you have to understand, right? You are the information security manager, always, right? And then the whole RACI matrix, okay? Can responsibility be delegated to somebody else as part of RACI metrics? Can responsibility be delegated in as part of RACI metrics? Responsibility can be delegated, right? It's accountability which cannot be delegated, right? So that's now I understand, right? Some of you are, and this is what happens when you are when you have read or when you have referred to the content some time back, right? Maybe last month or a month before that, right? Please don't get disheartened if you got it wrong. That's the most important point. What I would want to look at is make sure these are few thumb rules, right? And of course, there can never be an end to these thumb rules. Yes, as part of racing, you can always delegate responsibility, right? It's the accountability that you cannot be delegated. That can never be delegated. So, who is ultimately accountable in the context of an enterprise? Right? It's a board or senior management. Perfect. Right? Not information security manager, sir. Information security manager is responsible for information security. Uh, and when it comes to few elements, yes, information security manager is accountable. But I was talking about in the context of enterprise, who is ultimately accountable, right? So that's the part which you will have to make sure that you are focusing on. So there will be questions like that also: who's ultimately accountable, right? And because it's English, right? Sometimes the word may be replaced. Okay. So as in, who is ultimately responsible for information security in the context of enterprise? That also is senior management, right? So there are things which, there are terms which may be replaced. At the end of the day, people who are setting these questions are also human beings. So please remember that. Okay. So there is that 1 to 2% of flexibility that you keep maintaining in your mind as well, so that uh, you don't curse yourself for getting an answer wrong and then trying, or getting stuck in that confusion that, okay, this is what was taught to me, this is what is there in the, in the review manual, and then this question is speaking about this. Why is it that I'm getting everything wrong? Please don't get disheartened like that, right? So you can always, if you are stuck in something like that, please remember your trainer is there always to back you, right? So you can always, I would strongly recommend, go back to the trainer, right? Ask the question so that that gets cleared. Because at the end of the day, you're there to clear the exam. So whatever correction is required for you to clear the exam, make sure that the correction happens, right? This is what I mentioned. What is management is ultimately responsible for what? Everything, right? They are the ones who ensure something is performed, right? And who is supposedly required to make sure they exercise due care, and what is supposedly responsible to exercise due diligence. And what is the difference between due care and due diligence? Folks understand what's the difference between due care and due diligence? Yep. So basically, we're talking about due care and due diligence, right? And basically, due diligence is a subset of due care. Exercising due care is basically ensuring whatever that is required is always performed. Ensuring, understanding whatever is required. So, for example, if you're talking about the senior management or board of directors, it is their responsibility to make sure that they understand what is the risk appetite, what are the different types of risks in the context of the enterprise that they should be focused on. What are their liabilities? What are they liable for? So this is something that they are exercising due care, and because they understand these things, then they ensure that those things are taken care of. Because the board understands the importance of taking care of things, taking care of the entire management of the enterprise, they appoint a CEO, right? And who then exercises due diligence in making sure that HR, finance, legal, etc., they are taken care of, right? So they are the ones who give you money, most important element. They are the people who make sure that they resolve conflicts. They are the ones who ensure that they always are in the oversight of whatever is happening across the enterprise. At the same time, they also provide the right kind of enterprise. They are the ones who owns all the policies. These policies are, but their whim, their wish, their fancy at the end of the day, right? The next couple of things that I wanted to speak about is the whole concept of thinking like a manager. Now, there are multiple videos available on YouTube, right? Which I would strongly recommend that you folks go through if you haven't already. Okay, so please make sure that you go through those videos. Okay, uh, because the reason is when you are thinking like a manager, what exactly does thinking like a manager uh, means? Something that you would come to know, because we are talking about a 3 hour session, of which maybe about an hour 15 minutes is where we're just going through this content, and then we'll do some Q&As, right? uh, but the idea of those videos, it will be very much focused, that 1 hour or so they will only speak about what exactly thinking like a manager is, right? Staying true to strategic, integrating with business strategy, understanding business goals, making sure risk management your priority, right? How do you create value? How do you optimize resources? Making sure that things are driven through policy and not because of somebody's whim or fancy, right? Making sure that you take all the requirements from a legal, compliance, regulatory, customer, vendor, right? So all these elements are taken into account when you are looking at your information securities requirements, right? How do you, as I said, right, value delivery, how do you deliver the max with the minimum possible? Because you are heavily dependent on IT. So how is it that you are effectively integrating with IT at various levels? And the fact that you are effectively integrating shows in terms of your value creation and your resource optimization. How you're doing this, that's basically, let's say you and IT are going hand in hand, right? In terms of, let's say, incident response. Okay. You are your incident response team, the roles and responsibilities which are assigned. Okay. So you don't have a separate team doing nothing throughout the year, waiting for an incident to come, wasting potential, time, resources, money, everything. You will not do that. You have people doubling up. Okay. And then your emphasis on risk assessment, risk mitigation, risk communication. Okay. And if you are a manager thinking like a manager, right? Each of these things, being cognizant of the fact that having the right kind of knowledge vis-a-vis in a practical scenario, it's not that you are always walking into green field. You're not setting up things from scratch, right? You should be, aware of the fact that you are inheriting things from somebody. So when you are inheriting things, there is always a delta that you might want to bridge. How is it that you are going to? So obviously there is already value creation. So how is it that you're going to make it better? Because getting all the six right, the elements of effective governance, it's not possible because your risk landscape is always increasing, always evolving, and then your business requirements are evolving. There are new regulations every time, every year, right? There are different kinds of requirements coming in from customers. Okay, so and then yeah, internal departments, they've got different needs. So given that getting all the six right, it's not possible. What are the six? Strategic alignment, risk management, value delivery, resource optimization, assurance process integration. So when I'm saying all the six right, what does it mean? Like for example, getting the absolute green report in internal external audit report, making sure that all your controls are regularly properly measured. You never missing the fact that okay, information about a control performing or not performing. Okay, you always have information to that or input to that. You're always giving value delivery. So getting all these perfect is not possible. There is, and it's a matter of you know juggling between these things. I mean, when I'm saying not possible, I'm not talking about you're missing it by a mile, but then there is always room for improvement. That's the whole plan, do, check, act part that we run through when we are going through the information security management, right? There is always room for improvement. There is all, so that's where you're focusing on continuous improvement always, right? And when you're thinking like a manager, making sure that especially when it comes to rolling up sleeves and working there, areas where that happens is where uh, it would matter, or it would matter the most to think like a manager, especially for example incident response. When you're planning for incident response and when you're doing incident response, two areas where it becomes very very important for people to realize that it's not that straightforward, it's not that easy, right? You don't have to roll up your sleeve and get there, right? You are responsible for something. Like for example, are you responsible for incident response planning? You as an information security manager is responsible for incident response planning. Now are you responsible for forensic analysis? Yes you are, because you are basically putting the plan, right? That's a responsibility that you're delegating to somebody. Basically it's all, there are few activities that you are actually responsible for. Okay, and that's a part that, so that when you're looking at a question, right, this is where things would be different. Okay, so like for example, there is an incident response manager, right, who have got their roles and responsibilities defined. Okay, now as part of that, and this we are talking about information security incident management and information security incident response, there are things which are, I mean those responsibilities, they are uh, completed by people having a specific role. But these roles, because it's all information security related, right, they basically roll up to you. So you need to understand that mapping, right? When you talk about communication, how to effectively communicate, right? Understanding the importance of communication, understanding the importance of planning. The more effective the plan is, the more effective the outcome is. But then the catalyst there is communication, because when you are doing an incident management activity, when you are doing incident response activity, And by the way, is incident management part of incident response? Yeah. When you are reading through the question also, it is very important that these are very small nitty-gritties that you have to pay focus to. Okay. Incident response is part of incident management. Okay. This is the element of substitution that I was talking about when I was talking about terms. Okay. So yeah, I mean, come on, man, it's such a small thing. Why do you have to toy around that? No, no, but questions would basically be toying around like that. So please pay attention to that, folks. Okay. Next part is the role of performance measurement and metrics. Folks understand all the way from governance related metrics to different types of metrics. You at least went through a few types of metrics. Can I get a thumbs up quickly? Like all the way from critical success factors to key goal indicators to KPIs, KRIs. What are different types of KRIs, right? What are different types of goal indicators? How do you basically look at critical success factor, right? So make sure that you understand these things in the context of DR, in the context of BCP. What exactly, for example, what is indicator of attack? What is indicator of compromise? What is recovery time objective? What is mean time to detect, mean time to resolve, mean time to respond? The difference between these. Okay. Some of these things will not or may not come out straight out of uh, the review manual, but I would definitely recommend that you folks go through uh, a few of these, right? Now, come on, where do I find it? Okay, use AI. Okay, which model? I'll not be the advertiser for them. You choose whatever that suits your need. Okay, Copilot or Gemini or Chat GPT or DeepSeek or Grok, you're up to you. Or if anything else, or Perplexity. But make sure that you take right few examples when you're practicing. Okay. The same thing is applicable in case you folks have exhausted the question and answer. Ask these tools to generate more questions and throw those questions to you. Okay, I'm sure you folks might have been already doing it, but if you're not, it's a great source. Okay, the points that we've already spoken about, make sure that you understand all concepts before you start attempting questions. Don't do substitution. Make sure that you are analyzing the scenario. Make sure you are using the concepts of decision making. There is always strategy behind. There is always a roadmap to execute the strategy. There is always the decision should always be risk based. Okay, and the prep resources, they're already shared with you folks, if I'm not wrong, in the respective Telegram groups. But then, yeah, these are the preparation related resources that we always recommend. Uh, Only once you have exhausted all the resources that are given to you is where, if you would want to go for any third party, please go there. But then please take it with a pinch of salt. As I said, people who said those questions, like for example, either in those exam center or um, Udemy, so or plural site, whichever is the source that you want to go through, right? A third party resource. Please make sure that you take it with a pinch of salt, because sometimes the answers to those questions can also be wrong, right? So unless, I mean, as far as you're making sure that your concept is correct, your understanding of terms is correct, yeah, you can always use these mock exams basically for your getting your timing right and all of that, right? But then don't change your thought process because of an answer there. Always stick to what is available in the official ISACA driven content. Okay, great. All right, we start the question and answers. Okay, here's the first question, or rather, questions with, I would say, clues or hints. Let's start with that. Okay. So the first one is related to timeline. So a couple of these points is something that we focused on. Okay. So at which points will decisions be made to accept a risk? Identification phase, assessment phase, analysis phase, or evaluation phase? Folks, there are 48 of you, so obviously I cannot explain, who all got it wrong. It will be very difficult, right? Uh, I can give the right answer and a quick explanation, and then we will be able to move forward. Okay. And of course, we're talking about a time bound. We got about 1.5 hours, so we'll have to make sure that we are time bound. So from the next question onwards, I'll give you maybe a minute, minute and a half. 13 times up. I'll just give the answer. Okay, the right answer for first question that you see on the screen, it says uh, timeline related, so it is risk evaluation. So when you look at the risk assessment, okay, when you look at B, it is risk assessment, that is a mixture of analysis and evaluation. However, the decisions are always made at evaluation phase, right? Not identification, not analysis, right? So this is where the timeline part, the sequence part comes into picture. What happens when, right? Risk acceptance, basically, what is the next step with respect to risk response would always be taken at risk evaluation phase. Okay. The next question is more in terms of tense. Okay. The most important consideration when developing the policies is that management signs off, they are based on threats, there is consistency with standards, no significant detail is omitted, right? So here the focus should be on understanding the terms. You are talking about developing the policies, and you have to look at the relationship between policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, etc. when you are writing the policies, right? So that's where it becomes very important that you understand. All right, team. So the correct answer here is consistency with standards. So if you actually look at, I was telling, right, the moment you see management, please don't select it. Management is not always the right answer. Okay, the moment, so when you are writing a policy, okay, policy and standard consistency, when you are looking at the four, picking of whatever is available, right? So consistency with standard is important when you talk about writing a policy. Okay, now folks understand when what standards that we're talking about. We're talking about policy, standard, procedures and guidelines. The policy related standard and the standard that we're talking about is not industry standards like, uh, um, ISO 27001, NIST, PCI-DSAs. We're not talking about that, right? It's both ways, Swati. It's both ways. It should be, right? So that's, I mean, so if you're looking at it, of the available options, that's most important consideration. Next one is scope related and scope roll up answers, right? Whatever is most encompassing. So that's the thing. Okay, so I will not read the questions here. Okay, please give me both the answers. I'm putting 2 minutes here. Okay, as a timer on. Okay, so how are you going to give me two answers? So this and that. It's like that.
Okay, team, time's up. So, what's the first question? Scope. Okay. Business impact assessment primarily provides information on which of the following. What does business impact assessment or business impact analysis does? It's basically only impact, correct? When you are looking at business impact analysis, what is it that you are looking at? You are basically looking at impact, correct? So when you are looking at impact, what exactly is impact? What's the most closest when you are looking at? What exactly is impact looking at? Loss. Impact is loss, right? So escalation of loss over time, right, is the right answer. Okay, so Vamsi, uh, please switch only to me. Okay, only give me the answer. Okay, so when you are looking at BI, maximum tolerable outage is how much that I can tolerate. That's not directly linking to loss. BIA directly links to loss, right? Business impact assessment. If the availability of an information asset is not there for such a long time, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, then how exactly the loss basically keeps on increasing? That's what business impact analysis is always aimed at, right? So for question one, the correct answer is B, escalation of loss over time. For the second question, right, the correct answer is C, service levels or service level agreement, basically. The most important consideration when contracting with a service provider is, so when you look at personally identifiable information, right to audit, and escalation and notification, A, B, and B, all these three, they will be part of the service level agreement, right? General service level agreement would include how exactly escalation should happen, how exactly notification should happen, the right to audit, right to inspect clause would be there as part of SLA. That's where the second one is, the clue there is a roll up, right? Which is part of what? Okay, so the answer is B and C. Okay, the next one with clues. Again, I'm just putting the timer on. Remember the first question, it's outcome based. Outcome. When you are looking at outcome, what is it that we're talking about? And read the options completely. Okay, so when what exactly that assigning roles and responsibility mean? What exactly is achieving acceptable impact mean? Is there something called acceptable impact? Okay, in the first place, so look at that particular thing. What is standardizing risk assessment mean? Okay, develop complete control objective mean, right? And remember, this is outcome based. Okay, and we're talking about what is effective. How will you know that it is effective? Let's look at it. The first one, the hint is there. Assigning roles and responsibilities outcome based. Just by assigning roles and responsibilities, can you ensure something is happening? Obviously no. Achieve acceptable impact. What is acceptable impact? There is nothing called acceptable impact. There is acceptable risk level. Okay, there is acceptable risk level. There is nothing called acceptable impact. Please remember, that's where, please do not substitute a point with your assumption. Okay, you assumed achieve acceptable impact is achieving acceptable risk. Am I right in saying that? People who chose B, you assumed that it is achieve acceptable risk. That's not correct. Okay, standardizing risk assessment and develop complete control objective. If you just develop a control objective without a control design leading into implementation of controls, that's not a proper outcome. Just by writing control objective, it's like writing the mission statement and vision statement for the enterprise, right? It's not outcome oriented. Whereas standardizing risk assessments, as an effective program has got the same element or the same type of risk assessment throughout the enterprise. So the correct answer for the sorry, my apologies. The correct answer for the first one, either it is B or it is C. Okay, standardizing risk assessment or achieve acceptable impact. Which one would you select if the question is asked to me? Okay, between these two, I would actually pick B. Okay, because that is more closer to outcome. Standardizing risk assessment as part of an enterprise method, I mean, as an enterprise's effective security program, as an outcome, yes, it's a consistent way in which I am doing risk assessment. However, when I'm doing risk assessment, vis-a-vis making sure achievable achievable acceptable impact, in even though it is just limited to impact, not the likelihood. If I compare between those two, I would actually want to pick B, because at least it is looking at risk mitigation or risk response also throughout, right? Uh, so that's what is the, I would say, confusing aspect here. If you look at C, it is only assessment, but B, it is through, it's basically the entire risk management. So for the first, B is the correct answer. Okay, and yeah, so some of you have rightly pointed out, if the word outcome, if the hint is not there, okay, you would lean towards C more than B. Okay, but that's the reason why there is a hint which is given to you here, not for all the questions, of course. The next one is writing it, and yeah, most of you got it right. It is C, conducting regular security reviews, because we just spoke about it, right? Writing is not enough. Go look and verify, and the only way that you can ensure that policy compliance is there by conducting security reviews. Okay, so just in case if you folks were wondering what exactly is the right answer for first question, it is option B, achieving acceptable impact, and second one, it is C, B and C. Okay, moving next. Yep, again, go through. So, sales department personnel regularly ignore a policy on leaving workstations unattended after logging in. The information security manager should first do what? Remember, if there is non-compliance to the policy, what should you first do? You first do risk assessment. That's what we spoke about, right? So the correct answer for this, you are not going to immediately raise enforcement actions, notify the department head of non-compliance, require manager to accept risk. What risk are you accepting, right? So basically, unless and until you do a risk assessment, you will not basically be able to look at and determine the next course of action. The first one, for the first question, the answer is C, assess the risk of non-compliance. Let's look at the second one. Who is the highest here? The highest here is COO. Among CISO, COO, CIO, CTO, COO is the highest. So if you look at CIO and CTO both in an enterprise, it means generally CTO may be reporting to CTO may be reporting to the CIO, right? And you can also consider, given the kind of an organization, maybe CISO is also reporting to CIO. So that basically is COO, and between CIO, it is COO is the highest, so better suited. So for the first one, it is C. The second one, it is B. Those are the correct answers. Okay. Yeah. So I'm putting the timer on again. Please read through these questions. So management is often not the answer. It's good. Okay. So it's given. So for the question one, classification of information resources is primary responsibility of the data owner, right? Data classification should always be done by data owner. In this case, who's the data owner? The originator of the data is always the data owner, correct? So for the first one, C is the correct answer. The reason why you would have chosen B is because, again, substitution. Understanding of the term is very important. Now you folks understand why I keep emphasizing on, or why I kept emphasizing on the term, the meaning of the term in your mind. If it changes, your answer changes, right? A custodian of the data is not responsible. Who is custodian of all data in an enterprise generally? IT is the custodian because IT manages all the data. Custodian basically is holding, having a custody of your data, right? But IT, are you making IT responsible for data classification? No, right? It should not be the case. It should be the folks who are originating, who are creating the data owner. So that is the reason why. Please go through to all the folks who have shared or given the answer as B. Please go through the glossary. Very important, right? And when you are going through the manual, wherever there is a talk about asset identification, asset classification, overall asset management, which you would find it both in domain 1 as well as in domain 2. Please pay special attention to that section. Go through and understand that. Okay. Um, Even if you like, then this is what I keep saying, right? When you attend any kind of a weekend batch, okay, morning, evening, or something like a training which basically happens for 35 to 40 hours, which basically means that over a month you are going through this concept, and after that, maybe after a month, you come back and start answering these. You will completely forget domain 1 and domain 2. It can happen when you are there in domain 4 itself, that you would have missed complete all the concepts as part of domain 1. So that's why it is important that you keep in touch if your focus is on clearing the exam. Okay. Second one, to address legal and regulatory security in fire. Sorry, to address legal and regulatory security requirements, an information security manager should, okay, ensure policies cover all legal and regulatory requirements, adopt international security standards, confer with corporate counsel or legal counsel, okay, assess risk of non-compliance. So I'll put it this way. Okay, let's bisect this question. I see most of the folks basically went with the moment it's legal and regulatory requirement, they said, okay, fine, it's easier. I'll go and ask the legal counsel. The question here is the legal counsel will give you only a view. Okay, the legal counsel will only give you a view. Unless and until you risk of non-compliance, there is a requirement. What would you first do? You first assess the risk. What should I, just because there is a requirement doesn't mean I blindly go and follow it. The correct answer here for second one is assessing the risk of non-compliance. Without doing risk assessment, how can I, even if, I mean, even if I confer with legal counsel, what will they give? They give me the pros and cons. They will explain that particular requirement. But then at the end of the day, it's a risk assessment which would help me understand whether or not to follow, whether or not to comply. Correct? So D is the right answer. Okay, so it's C and D for these two questions. So with that, okay, all help with respect to answering the questions is gone. Okay, now let's pick up the pace. Okay, 1 minute per question. I do understand that you folks are still trying to get up to speed. Those who are a little hesitant, but please make sure that you are answering, attempting. So we're talking about which of the following reasons is the most important to develop a strategy before implementing an information security program, right? So basically, uh, we're talking about what is the reason to develop a strategy. What is the reason why you have a strategy in place? Is the question understood? The question is asking you, why should you have a strategy in place? The strategy is in place to integrate your information security to organization's objectives. Is that understood by everyone? Is that the same understanding? Strategy is basically a vehicle, number one, to go from your current state to the desired state, and number two, even more importantly, so to make sure that the organization's objectives and information security objectives, basically you're aligning information security to the organization's objectives, correct? So if you have answered C, you require management support before you develop the strategy itself. But then the question is asking you, why is it that you are having a strategy in place? So the answer is B, to integrate with development activities, basically to integrate, because if you look at it, is the organization's objectives, IT objectives and security objectives. So as information security objectives, you are integrating both with IT as well as org objectives, right? Of course, the priority will go to organization or enterprise objectives. So correct answer here is B, right? Please read through the question and understand the question. Okay, you're not developing the strategy to gain management support. Okay, you gain management support, you show them that yes, the strategy properly integrates with org objectives. How does, okay, let me just start the timer again. So what it's asked, the question is asking you, how does knowledge of risk appetite help to increase security control effectiveness? Okay, it's basically asking you, you know what is your organization's risk appetite, right? The comparison is between risk appetite, or the relationship that is being established is risk appetite versus security control effectiveness. How effective the control is. Control is basically put to do what? To mitigate the risk, right? Correct? Agreed, everyone? A control is in place to mitigate the risk, and the control's effectiveness, aka the control strength, would be tweaked to the extent maximum possible till the risk that is there falls either at or below the acceptable level, which is according to risk appetite. Clear? Agreed? Everybody agrees to that? Yes? Now, basis this, look at this question. You put a control, you know what is the risk appetite, right? And thereby you are tweaking the control strength to ensure that you're mitigating the risk effectively. Look at the options. It shows senior management that you understand their needs. It's absolutely irrelevant to the question which is asked. It provides a basis for redistributing resources to mitigate risk above the risk appetite, which is correct. So B is the correct answer. So far, we have not yet looked at C and D. Because I know the risk appetite, I have the control. Basically, I have a control. If I am looking at the risk appetite, I'm looking at the control's effectiveness. I'm tweaking the control strength to make sure my risk falls below the risk appetite, acceptable level, right? Now, what would I do next in the context of the enterprise? I would obviously move to other control, right? Yes or no? It's an iterative process for all the controls across the enterprise. So if I know the risk appetite, I can basically make sure that I redistribute my resources to mitigate risk above the risk appetite. Wherever the risk is above the risk appetite, I will focus on those. It requires continuous monitoring because the entire risk environment is constantly changing. uh, if you look at it, okay, continuous monitoring should happen across all the risks, right, in your enterprise, irrespective of the knowledge of risk appetite, right? Because you have to continuously monitor all the risks, irrespective of your understand your knowledge of risk appetite, because it doesn't directly address. It facilitates communication with between management and the sorry. It facilitates communication with the management about the importance of security. Oh no, definitely A and D are definitely not the answer. Just because there is management there, it tends to basically highlight management and put them on the pedestal, but that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is B. Understanding risk appetite will make sure that I can manage my resources. This is what value delivery and resource optimization is all about. So correct answer is B. Okay, let me switch on, put on the timer again. Okay, so what I would say is uh, give yourself a round of applause because most of you said one, got the answer correct, right? The correct answer is D, compliance with organization's information security standards. So the most important point here is even the person who got it wrong at least went with compliance only as the answer, right? So the question is basically saying when an organization is setting up a relationship with third party IT service provider, which of the following is one of the most important topics to include in the contract from a security standpoint? So when you look at it, use of a two-factor authentication system, existence of an alternative hot site in case of business disruption, these two are very specific. But when you look at B, compliance with organization's information security requirement, that's more encompassing because my organization security requirement would include B and C. That's why D is more encompassing here, right? So whoever chose D, which majority of you, or rather all of you, except one, got it right. Now, the only thing basically, I think the reason why one person who got it wrong, who selected A, compliance with international security standard, I think the reason could be, comparison between international standard versus information security requirement for my organization. Uh, as I mentioned, when we were looking at some of the guidelines and things to keep in mind, please make sure that I would rather focus first on my requirement rather than international security requirement. Okay, so it's like for the folks who understand this bit will be able to relate to it. Uh, if you want to look at it, a RERA compliance versus Vastu compliance for a new home or a flat that you want to buy, what would you pick, right? Most of the folks who understand what Vastu is definitely would want to pick Vastu compliance more than RERA compliance, right? It's like that because Vastu is my requirement. RERA is more of a global requirement. Everybody want to look at RERA, but then that's not the case for everyone. So first I would look at my own requirement and then go to international security standards, best practices, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me put the timer back on. Okay, so the correct answer here is D, end-to-end transaction flow. Let's look at the question. Which of the following choices is most important to verify to ensure the availability of key business processes at an alternate site? The question is basically asking you availability of a key business process at an alternate site. Recovery time objective will only tell you how quickly you have to restore. However, it is talking about availability of a key business process. If you only have recovery time objective, will you take both input and output into that process? Functional delegation matrix, it speaks about who can do what in absence of somebody else. Staff availability, it's only staff. We're talking about people, process, and technology, everything. But when you look at an end-to-end transaction flow, it starts all the way from where is the role of, let's say, a facility team to a finance team to a legal team to an HR team to an operations team, pretty much everything, right? So when you look at end-to-end transaction flow for a business process, you will basically be able to understand what all is required for that particular business process. Only then you will be able to understand all their requirements, and only then you will be able to ensure the entire business processes availability at an alternate site. Clear? So D is the correct answer. Which of the following steps should be first in developing an information security plan? Okay, perform a technical vulnerabilities assessment. It's only technology based, right? If you want to look at it. Okay, everybody able to see the screen? All right, okay, thanks. Mohsin, you might want to just relook at your connection. Analyze the current business strategy. Perform a business impact analysis, assess the current levels of security awareness. All of them are important before you develop an information security plan. But then when you are looking at first, the first one here and the most important one that I would focus on is the current business strategy, which is B. So B is the correct answer here. Most of you got it right. Some of you, the reason why you would have got it wrong is because you might, your focus is there only from a technology perspective, right? So go through the governance domain fundamentals for you to get these questions, these kind of questions correct. Okay. Information security governance is primarily driven by, information security governance is primarily driven by which of the following? Okay, just start. We're talking about primarily driven by which one? Primarily. Time's up. The if you look at it, my governance should be primarily driven by my business strategy, right? My business strategy may include or can include regulatory requirements as well. Here it's more encompassing. Business strategy is the right answer, right? That's the correct answer. Rather than regulatory requirements, I would focus more on business strategy because my governance is more in terms of, it focuses more in terms of strategic alignment, risk management, value delivery. So all those six elements that I was talking about, one of the most important elements is strategic alignment, right? And that can basically happen only when you are doing alignment with business strategy. All right. So any issues with the pace at which we are going? Are you finding this useful? The reason why I'm asking is because I'm seeing people dropping off. So I hope this is not a boring exercise. All right, let's continue then. The first step to create an internal culture that embraces information security is implement stronger controls, conduct periodic awareness training, actively monitor operations, gain endorsement from executive management. Please remember, here we are talking about the first step. The first step. Kareem, time's up. The correct answer is option B, gain endorsement from executive management. That's the first step. Basically, remember, culture is very important and culture is always top down, right? Your employees basically mimic what senior management does. Okay, that's very, very important, right? So when, of course, periodic awareness training definitely improves. Having this right kind of controls if you're looking at more importantly administrative control, training also being one of your control. Yes, certainly you can aim at improving culture. However, here the first activity or the first step before you do all of that, of the available options, that's the first thing that I would start with, endorsement from executive management. I'm telling them that the organization culture is not security aware and I want to improvise that. And they were going to ask me, how is it that you've come about this? I said, I have done this risk assessment. These are the things that I've taken care of. These are the various risks that I've identified. This is what the mitigation steps that I'm putting in place to make sure that I am going to make the organization culture more security focused. Right? Is that clear? How exactly or why exactly D is the right answer? This is why D is the right answer. What is the purpose of information security strategy of the four below? Uh, the question before that, that was gaining executive management. Option D is the right answer, Vamsi, for the previous one. A is the correct answer here, right? Express the goals of information security program and the plan to achieve them, right? That's the reason why information security strategy exists, right? Uh, B is not the answer because it's directly jumping to controls, right? And that too, it got into even more technical or could be non-technical also. But configuration level of an information security control is not something that uh, the strategy is expected. A is the right answer here. Which of the following should be included in a good privacy statement? A notification of liability on accuracy of information, a notification that information will be encrypted, a statement of what the company will do with the information it collects, a description of the information classification process. The correct answer here is C as in Charlie, a statement of what the company will do with the information it collects. Uh, that is, if you look at it, a privacy statement. We're talking about privacy data, right? It is you thinking like a manager, right? Again, most of you got it right. Good job. Uh, a privacy statement is generally external. You're telling people, right? And or even it could be internal as well. But primarily, you're telling people whose data is collected, right? Now, how would I care how my classification process is, right? Let's say I have. Let's look at three things, okay? Amazon, Flipkart, and then Microsoft, government of my local government, and my local gas distributor, and uh, the grocery store guy, right? All these people, different people, they all collect, they have my information. Now look at it from all the other three options except option C. Look at it. Do I really care what is the information classification process within Amazon, or do I care whether what exactly Amazon will do with the information that it is collecting? Same is the case with a Microsoft or my local guy or the local government, whoever it is, right? Do I care whether or not information is encrypted or not, or do I care what is it that they are using it for? Do I care that there is a liability on accuracy of information when it's my information? So when you compare these, which is best? Obviously, C is best, right? So that's how you synthesize the question. Okay. So when you are in doubt, please take a little bit of time, and this is how you process that. And one of you had a question for this one. Okay. When you, I mean, your point is correct, Shafi, right? to a certain extent. Okay, my strategy comes first, then the roadmap comes, which basically is the plan. Okay, and then my policy standard procedure. But the reason why I have my strategy is a vehicle to go from current state to desired state. So it has the goals of an information security program, correct? Whatever goals that I include in my strategy, it is basically the goals for my information security program. Is that correct? Making sense? So that's why A here is the right answer. Okay, moving on. When developing an information security program, what is the most useful source of information for determining available human resources? So correct answer is skills inventory. Okay. Again, put yourself in that shoes. Think like a manager. Okay. You are developing the security program. If you're developing the security program, what does it mean? You need more people, correct? Yes or no? Now, when you need more people, it's for you. Okay. To whom will you basically conduct a proficiency test for? And directly will you jump on to proficiency test? Right? It's basically source of information. The question is asking source of information. Proficiency test is actually an activity. So obviously that's not correct answer. Job description and org chart. So let's look at job descriptions. How can you basically understand how many people are available basis job description? I mean, the point that I'm trying to highlight here is when you are giving an answer, forget about everything else. At least justify to yourself why you are choosing that particular answer. Okay. Next thing is org chart. Okay. Org chart basically tells you who's reporting to what, what's the structure in the organization. How can it basically tell you who is available and who is not available? And then compare that with skills inventory. And let's say that org chart is there. Okay, basis org chart. Okay, these are the people who are there as part of the structure. I can maybe use a few people because the boss told me that they are available. Let's look at it from that standpoint. Okay, there is this particular team out of which I know I can use 10 people from there. It's a team of 40 people. They don't really require, they're trying to fire every, about 10 people. Will you directly take them without understanding what skills they possess? Will you? Or would you actually look at skills inventory? I would basically, and Isaka would want you to look at the skills inventory. First, understand what is the skill set available within the enterprise, and then go look at people who have those skills. And that's exactly how you are going to come to resource optimization, giving the best value to the enterprise with the least amount of resources being consumed. Right? Let's go on to the next question. Sorry, do you have any question, Ashok? Okay. Which of the following is one of the best metrics an information security manager can employ to effectively evaluate the results of security program? Number of controls implemented, number of control objectives accomplished, percent of compliance with security policy, reduction in number of reported security incidents. One of the best questions that I come across. This basically helps you understand where you stand. So correct answer is B. B as in ball. Okay. So when you actually look at it, okay, this is your understanding of how well you understand your information security program. Uh, precisely from a control objective perspective. Control objective is a high level one. Control objective, you can say, is as at a level of your critical success factors, right? Uh, so my control objective I put there, and then I have got multiple control objectives. For that, I design my controls. And if I am looking at it, let's say I have, let's say, 10 or 15 control objectives, and then I am looking at my success or failure or my efficacy of my security program. If I am looking only at number of controls implemented, that's only part of it. So A is actually part of B. Okay, percentage of compliance with security policy. Um, if you look at just compliance with security policy, right, it is not encompassing, it's not whole. Okay, and reduction in the number of reported security incidents. You're just reducing security incident, but control objective covers much more in terms of requirements, right? So that's why B is the best metric to tell you how much you comply. Okay, just allow me one moment. Rather, let me put the next question. Somebody's at the door, I need to get them. Please go ahead and answer this question as well. What I really like is, no, the second person got it right. What I really like is majority of you, right, are going in the right direction in terms of your thought process, right? Which is really, really, I appreciate that when you talk about the thought process. Okay, we're talking about which of the following metrics would be the most useful in measuring how well information security is monitoring violation logs, right? Now, we're talking about efficiency. When we talk about efficiency, it is about outcome oriented, correct? So when you talk about B and C, are they outcome oriented? They are not. Okay, there are violation logs which are just produced, reports are produced. What are you doing with it? If you don't do anything, you cannot really call it efficiency. The question is asking you in measuring how well information security is monitoring violation logs. Okay, so B and C are definitely not the correct answers, because in B and C you are just talking about logging. You're not doing anything there, are you? Now that's where the thing becomes between A and D, right? So most of you selected D, right? Which, unless and until you do A, D becomes irrelevant. Okay, so you first basically look at penetration attempts investigated. How many penetration attempts are investigated? Okay, in that context is where frequency of corrective actions taken comes into picture, right? The metric which is most useful, okay, in making sure that we are using the violation logs is A. D is an outcome of an outcome. The question is asking you about the first outcome. I have a log, yes. How well am I monitoring that log? The metric is A, penetration tests or penetration attempts investigated. Okay, I've got so many penetration attempts. The outcome of that outcome is frequency of corrective actions taken. So you've gone to the next level before completing A. A is the correct answer. 3 people got it right. So people who took the route of D, right? Picking D, I that's why I was telling that your thought process is perfect. Okay, you're there, getting there in terms of your thought process, but a little bit more focus in reading through the question clearly, you would have gone to A. Okay, folks, all I would say is this. Okay, for people who are not answering. Okay,
If you don't step in, you would not know where you stand. Okay. You may say that, yes, I am making a silent note of the answer, and then I'm checking with what you are doing. But I would say that's not brave enough. Okay. You would not be able to uh, proceed and answer the question in the exam. I'm talking about even for a practice exam. The correct answer is C, security metrics. Okay. If you look at risk assessment or user access rights, that's not the right answer. We're talking about effectiveness of a security control. How would you know something is effective or not? It's basically using metrics. It's a straightforward question, right? When you look at return on security investment, that could be one of the metric, right? Uh, but then again, cost is not always the only element, and the return could be, of course, in terms of value also. But then, return on security investment is generally measured in cost element or cost perspective. So, what I would strongly recommend with respect to return on security controls effectiveness is through security metrics. Okay, great. So I'll take a quick, a pause. I just wanted to understand. So far all good. Uh, I'm sure you folks already said that you found it useful. Now we've got a couple of more minutes, few more minutes, right? So in terms of extending it uh, for a few more minutes, so because I've got a lot more questions, I can just keep going on, right? But then of course we have timed this particular session for about 3 hours, right? So for that there is just 5 more minutes left. So can we extend it by maybe 5-10 more minutes? Yeah, that's the reason why, Anthony. I have seen that people from different geographies uh, joining in. So I understand. I know a few folks who have started their morning coffee here. Okay, so and I know a few folks might have just been sitting there way past their bedtime. So okay, maybe a few more questions and then we can end today's session. Regarding another session like this, you will have to check with the likes of Saksham. Okay, I'm not sure when they're going to plan it. Of course, I will pass on the feedback. Okay, the fact that okay, you folks find it useful. All right, moving on to the next question. Assuming that the value of information assets is known, which of the following gives the information security manager the most objective basis for determining that the information security program is delivering value? Number of controls, cost of achieving control objectives, effectiveness of controls, test results of controls. Please read to the question, okay? The question started off giving you away the answer. Let's look at the question. Okay, I'm reading the question in a different way. Okay, which of the following gives the information security manager the most objective basis for determining the information security program is delivering value? Okay, I've read the question. I'm reading again. Please pay attention to how I'm reading it. Okay, which of the following gives the information security manager the most objective basis for determining that the information security program is delivering value? Number of controls, definitely wrong answer. Effectiveness of controls, so the control effectiveness, is it giving me value? Yes. Test results of controls? No. Cost of achieving control objectives? Definitely yes. So if I'm reading the question, missing the first part of first statement, two I have the correct answer, B as well as C. Cost of achieving control objectives and effectiveness of controls. That's exactly where I said the question started off giving away the answer to you. Assuming that the value of information assets is known, right? So he started off giving you the context there by giving you that look at it in cost perspective, right? And that's where B, so between B and C, I choose B. Okay. So when you are reading through the question, yeah, sometimes the questions can be like this. Question would be a mouthful because this particular slide has a lot more space, real estate. It would look like just three sentences, but given the kind of real estate that you have, if you are using a smaller monitor, etc. and all, it may even look to be like a complete paragraph. And sometimes they just throw in a lot of English there just to make you think that it is also important. But if you read through it, if you pay more attention, it will be very straightforward. What is the most important contractual element when contracting with an outsourcer to provide security administration? The right to terminate clause, limitations of liability, the service level agreement, the financial penalties clause. With the folks who have been there right from the word go of this particular session, I'm sure you would get it right. I would want definitely, these last few questions that we are doing, everybody, please, okay, use your keyboard and type in an answer there. I would really appreciate that. That's the reason why you joined this session. I mean, if you're not participating in Q&A, there's no point in being part of this particular session, right? I was not really monitoring all of those, Vamsi, but I think I mean, if you're completely new, it's that number or that percentage that you quoted, that's actually quite good actually, right? When you have not attended a training session or when you've not gone through the any of the domain content, that's a decent one to start with. So right answer is C as in Charlie, as most of you got, because A, B, and D are part of C, right? Right to terminate clause, limitations of liability, the financial penalties, etc., all would be part of your service level agreement. Okay. What is the primary purpose of installing an intrusion detection system? To identify weakness in network security, to identify patterns of suspicious access, to identify how an attack was launched on the network, to identify potential attacks on the internal network. The question is English, just English. Okay, great. So the correct answer is D as in doll. Okay. What is the primary purpose of installing an intrusion detection system? Intrusion detection system basically detects, okay, any kind of issues. To identify weakness in network security, weaknesses is basically vulnerability identification. That's not IDS. To identify patterns of suspicious access, it's only access related, right? So that's not correct, but rather that's just very limited only to access management. IDS is not just related to access management; it's all types of issues. To identify how an attack was launched on the network, no, definitely. This is basically getting into investigation, so that's not the role of IDS. It's only a detective control. So D is the correct answer. Okay. So so we are at 1-7, as I said. We have extended it. Maybe just one last question, and then we will end it. We will call it a day. Okay. In the course of examining a computer system for forensic evidence, data on the suspect media were inadvertently altered. Which of the following should have been the first course of action in the investigative process? Perform a backup of suspect media to new media, create a bit by bit image of original media source onto new media,
make a copy of all files that are relevant to the investigation, run an error checking program on all logical drives to ensure that there are no disk errors. So irrespective of the first sentence, and this is how the questions would be sometimes, okay? Irrespective of the first sentence, okay, the first step or the first course of action when you are doing any kind of investigation is always to take a bit by bit image of original media source onto new media, correct? That's what we spoke about even when we are having a go at the guidelines and best practices, right? So B as in Bombay or ball is the correct answer here. Okay, making sure that the uh, bit by bit image of original media source onto new media, if you take it, it will ensure all sorts of legal and custodial requirements are fulfilled, and only then and then you can basically take a or conduct a proper forensic analysis. Okay,